All right, guys, welcome to episode 4. Happy Earth Day. Hope everyone's doing okay. It's been a little while since I touched base with you with the astronomy castle learning, and a lot of you guys did pretty well on that. Hopefully, you guys are all doing okay. I know over here we're getting outside as much as we can. We're juggling a lot of different stuff. My son's got a class in a few minutes. My daughter's got school. My youngest, 1.5-year-old is a psycho, so we're balancing all that while doing our own stuff with you guys, and just adjusting to the new normal, right? So I'm obviously experimenting with my dad's stash here. My dad rocked one of these in the '80s, so figured give it a roll slash look like the Tiger King. So I wanted to talk to you guys today. Well, first I want to talk, we're going to be getting into weather next week, and obviously we had a pretty cool weather event last night. It would have been perfect to kind of be in what I want to talk about with that, but I'm going to come back to this day. If you remember yesterday, really bad thunderstorm, right? We had some hail. It was crazy. A lot of people, my kids were all outside in the backyard looking at the rainbow. I know saw a lot of people taking pictures of the rainbows yesterday. So one thing I want you to remember was what happened yesterday, thunderstorm, what the weather was like today, right? You had bad thunderstorm, hail, things like that. And what's the weather like today? It's kind of cool outside, right? In general, the weather's hasn't been a great April for weather, but it's it's cold. It's colder. That's because a thunderstorm is associated with a cold front, right? And we're going to talk about why that happens, why a cold front, when it pushes through, right, the air rises fast, kind of like rubbing your feet on a carpet, causing static electricity. That energy is released, and it's always colder the next day. So we're going to talk about that in the coming weeks, right? And when you have a thunderstorm, you can almost bet that the next day it's going to be colder. But hopefully you guys already watched the NASA video. Hopefully you watched my castle learning review. Just quick review. It's less than 5 minutes, going over some of the things that you guys struggled with. For the most part, you guys actually did pretty good on that assessment. I want to talk about NASA, right? And hopefully you watch that. And the big takeaway from that is I want you to know is, like, why did we do all that? Why do we have NASA and everything like that, right? Werner von Braun, actually an ex-Nazi, is the father of space exploration, the father of NASA. Why did we start all that? It had nothing to do with exploration. It had to do with beating the Russians, right? A fight, the Cold War, a fight against communism. It's basically like, two tough guys in a gym loading plates onto a bench press, trying to outdo one another, without, they're not actually fighting. They might talk about it, but they're just trying to kind of flex their muscles at each other. And that's what the space race turned into. And if you watch the video, you'll see that the Russians were leading most of the time. And the only time we did something first was when we went to the moon, right? They had the first man in space, Yuri Gagarin, right? Wasn't us. Alan Shepard was our first man in space. They had the first person to orbit. Our first person to orbit was John Glenn. First person to do a spacewalk they had. Ours was Ed White. And that brought us up to Apollo 11, where Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin landed on the moon. And we had several Apollo missions after that, except for Apollo 13. That was just recently the 50th. Last week was the 50th anniversary of Apollo 13. Great movie. If you haven't seen it, go watch Apollo 13. But yeah, and throughout the Apollo, we've lost some astronauts along the way. If you watch, we had the Apollo 1 disaster, and that one didn't. We haven't lost any astronauts in space. No one's died in space. So the American losses, we lost the 3 astronauts, Roger Chaffee, Gus Grissom, and Ed White, the first man to do a spacewalk. They were doing a test on the ground, and you saw that if you watch the video, it was filled up with pure oxygen. There was a spark, and they couldn't get the hatch open. So those 3 astronauts died just in a test run. A lot of people thought that Gus Grissom was going to be, not even Neil Armstrong, Gus Grissom was going to be the first man to walk on the moon. And obviously, the rest of the missions leading up to Apollo 11, and then the several ones after that up to Apollo 17, and then they shut it down. We haven't been back to the moon since. We haven't been back to the moon since, I believe, 1973. So going on 40 years where no one's been to the moon. So there's talks about going back and things like that, which we're going to get to. That led us into a few other things. And the space shuttle, when I think of my childhood, when I think of NASA, I think of the space shuttle, right? You know, that picture, you can look up a picture of the space shuttle, it had wings on it. It was meant to be a kind of reusable craft. It's only used in low Earth orbit, right? So it can't go to the moon or anything like that. But, you know, my childhood, I had a little space shuttle. That's what I associate. If you did like a, you know, a test and you said the word NASA to me, I'd say space shuttle, right? So that was like, you know, what I associated with it. And, you know, they would go up, they'd, you know, kind of float around on there, and then they'd come back down and land. The Saturn V rockets would kind of break apart. They'd be 5-stage rockets, and they'd land with parachutes in the water. But these guys would actually land on the ground like a plane. That's why they had wings. You don't need wings in space. There's no air, right? But they needed when they landed. And with the space shuttle, unfortunately, those two disasters with the space shuttle, there was the Challenger disaster, which happened in January of 1986. People actually got bored with the Apollo missions. After a time, they got bored with the space shuttle missions too, and they were going to put a teacher up in space, Krista McAuliffe. I believe she was from New Hampshire. She's going to do a lesson from space and you know, teach kids, like almost like not a stream, you know, like you would have now, but kind of like she'd broadcast to the Earth, and you know, students would watch it. And she was going up in the Challenger spacecraft, and it was unseasonably cold in Florida. They actually had ice in Florida, freezing temperatures, and that made an O-ring brittle in one of the rocket boosters. And on live TV, when they did throttle up, there was a leak. It leaked into the fuel tank. It exploded live on TV. So that was 7 astronauts passed in the Challenger disaster. They fixed everything, which they did with that problem, and then it's pretty much a lull. They used the space shuttle then in February 1st of 2003. I remember this one very vividly. I was in college. They had the Columbia disaster. That one that went up in space, it was hanging out, doing what it needed to do up in space, and it was on re-entry. And what happened on liftoff, a piece of foam from a fuel tank actually ruptured the heat shield, right? When they're coming back through the atmosphere, like rub your hands together, right? You have a lot of friction, right? When they're coming back through the atmosphere, there's a lot of friction there, a lot of heat. And if you don't have the heat shields, if the integrity's broken on the heat shield, the spacecraft will break apart. And that's what happened. A piece of foam broke a hole into it. They actually could have prevented this one. They said, no, that happens all the time. They wanted to actually look at it when they were going up to the International Space Station, but they decided not to. And that broke apart over several states. You know, they had pieces of the space shuttle falling into people's backyards, you know, and things like that. It was pretty crazy. And then, you know, they went back up, had several missions after that, and then they retired the space shuttle in 2011, and we have not sent another human being from American soil into space since 2011. Right, so that's crazy to think. We're sending people. We had to go to Russia if we want to send an American up to space. It's crazy, but we took a turn. We pushed more spaceflight towards private industry, and SpaceX. Elon Musk, if you don't know who Elon Musk is, right, you should know who Elon Musk is, right? He's one of the most influential people in the world right now. Tesla Motors, a Tesla car, right? He makes Tesla. He was the original. He made his fortune off of making PayPal. But SpaceX is his thing, and he's been making all these really cool rockets with SpaceX, setting them up and delivering payloads to the International Space Station. And for the first time ever, on May 27th, which is actually my birthday, May 27th, they are sending up human beings once again from American soil on SpaceX. So it's a pretty big deal, you know, what they're doing. They also are sending up Starlink things. You actually can sometimes see them, those satellites. If you look up, you can see the Starlink there. It's actually providing internet. The idea is to provide internet across the globe through these satellites, right? So that's what Starlink's doing through SpaceX. And believe it or not, your entire life, you've had people in space. Right now, there are people flying around in low Earth orbit on the International Space Station. And if you can get an app on your phone, and you can actually see it, if you look up, you can see the space station. It looks like just like a star, but it's moving. And you can take a look and see the space station fly, you know, overhead. You can't, like, you know see anything. If you have a telescope, you can kind of make out the some shapes on it, but it'll just look like a little shiny star moving through the atmosphere. There's people on there, and there's been there your entire lives since 2001, people living on the International Space Station. So exciting stuff. We're sending people back into space from American soil, right? May 27th, it's happening. So yeah, that's it. The space flight stuff isn't on the Regents, but I love it. It's an important part of science. It's part of astronomy. So I love talking about it and touching base on it, even though it wouldn't be on the Regents. Not that you have a Regents anyway, but we're going to cover the stuff we want to cover. And there is some silver lining with not having a Regents. There's some things that I don't, I can cover more stuff that I like, I think you'll like, that would be cool. And I can kind of, maybe gloss over things that are maybe annoying or not as exciting to learn as other things. So there is some silver linings with all this. So I hope you guys are doing well. On Monday, we're going to get into weather, meteorology, right? Hopefully the weather turns. It's been really a crummy April. It's been kind of cold. It's cold today. But it's Earth Day today. Get outside, and then hopefully this weather will shift soon, and we will. I don't know if you can see my the baby's banging on the window over there. But hopefully the weather changes soon. We'll get some nice weather. This would be way worse, I feel like, if this happened. Think about if this happened in November and you're stuck inside, right? You have just the December, January. At least we got May, June, July on the horizon. We can get outside. We can do some things outside with all this. So that's what I'm going to try to do, incorporate some outdoor activities with weather and climate coming up. And again, hope you guys are doing well, and we'll touch base with one of these again next week.